Welcome to Smart Supply Chain, a podcast for supply chain professionals who think and work smarter. I'm your host, Shireen Garrison, along with my sister in supply chain, Sarah Garrison. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Shireen.
Today's topic is the new global trade environment and how things have changed over the past few years. Joining us today to discuss this is Dr. Ben Hazen. Dr. Hazen, welcome to Smart Supply Chain.
Hi, ladies. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Dr. Hazen is currently an assistant professor of operations and supply chain management at University of Dayton. He's previously served in the Air Force, and he also worked as an associate professor of logistics and supply chain management, as well as the deputy director of the Center for Operational Analysis at the Air Force Institute of Technology. And this sounds like a very fascinating career. Tell us a little bit more about your time in the Air Force.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to say I was never really able to hold down a job. So God thank the fact that the Air Force sends you around to different places every few years. I started as a satellite wideband telemetry system communications. So I learned all about communications, and especially in combat areas and different other precautions and methods that we have for keeping things secure. Then I moved on, became an officer, moved on to an aircraft maintenance and logistics type role, which really got me into supply chain management. And in both roles, I had very different types of jobs, everything from combat to communications to working in the astronautics department at the Air Force Academy, building little satellites and rockets, to launching and recovering some of the largest aircraft in our fleet, like C-5, C-17, and some refueling aircraft. And then I spent my last 4 years, as you mentioned there, at the Air Force Institute of Technology, where I got to be a professor in our graduate school there in the Air Force, teaching logistics and supply chain management stuff. And that was a really great last couple years. I retired in 2019, and I've pretty much been doing the same teaching, research, consulting, service in different areas, especially related to the Department of Defense and security and supply chain management and innovation. And so that's where I am currently, just down the street from Air Force Institute of Technology here at University of Dayton. And it's just a pleasure to be with y'all today.
Yeah, thanks so much for that recap. You were also busy in 2019 when you retired. You had the time to co-author a white paper with our ALUM CEO, Hannah Kane, and you guys were examining the areas of tension that affected the global trade landscape. Briefly give us an overview of what that paper was about.
That paper, really, I met Hannah at a DIMSCA conference, and we were on a panel together and just really had a good time. We talked a little further after the conference and wanted to get together to kind of mind meld, share some thoughts on what we were seeing out there in the supply chain. One of the cool things about talking with Hannah is it's one of the first questions she asks you every time. What are you seeing out there? And I love working with folks like that, kind of a little pod of people that just love to go out there and see what's going on, try to make better understanding of what's happening, taking that step back and seeing that big picture. So we were seeing a lot of things. We were just seeing, like you mentioned, a lot of that global tension happening. From a military perspective, we've been seeing movement from the unipolar world where the United States, after quote unquote winning the Cold War, is kind of the big game in town, and there's not a whole lot of others to challenge us and our ideas and our business prospects around the globe. We're starting to see some more tension there. This was a time we were having those trade wars, President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping over there in China. So we had different tariffs come at different times, sometimes without really any warning to others. We're also seeing the rise of, the BRICS and the BRICS Plus, kind of looking at the dollar, and the petrodollar is not, why does this need to be the one on top now? So just a lot of different folks vying for power. And what we saw was a global supply chain that was stretched very, very thinly and relied on some very key assumptions that aren't necessarily valid assumptions in this time frame. And so that's why we wanted to get together, write a paper to kind of share our ideas about what we're seeing out there, how we got to where we were, and then what are some mitigation steps that we could suggest to help others navigate these difficult, foreseeable times.
Excellent. Well, there was a lot happening in 2019. After that, of course, there was a global pandemic during that time period. You did mention that risk in your paper, but maybe it was a little bit more impactful than what we originally thought might be some sort of a disruption. How do you think that supply chains fared during that time and afterwards?
I hate to say it when we're talking about tragedy and disruption like that, but Hannah and I were pretty on point with kind of foreseeing different types of tensions that were going to come about based on global power structures and moving away towards certain global norms. And COVID came at a time that really exemplified some of those disruptions, some of those tensions, some of those differences of opinion on how you would manage something at a global level. That communism, socialism versus capitalism versus, whatever ism else that you want to put out there, seeing these kind of tensions arise out there. And so I think folks that were working with the right 3PLs, 4PLs, the right consultants, the right partners, I think were able to fare pretty well because they were able to see what was coming quicker than others were and then to adjust. And that's what disruption management's all about. Can I foresee that disruption? Do I have some resiliency baked into place to handle different types of disruptions? And then how do I know when it's time to pull those resilience levers? Because sometimes it's very hard to see things or to understand things that are happening around you. It's always hindsight's 2020, right? Like, hey, I should have done something. It takes some bold leadership sometimes to pull those levers when you're not sure what the situation looks like. You're not sure what all your other competitors and your customers are thinking as well. Not to brag, but I think those that followed our advice a little more probably fared a little better than those who did not.
How do you think the rest of your predictions held up?
Again, unfortunately, well, because our predictions in terms of more turmoil, more tumultuous environment around the globe. We went out of COVID, but then what else do we have? We have this Israel conflict, Israel-Iran. We have the Russian-Ukraine conflict that happened not long after. We have a lot of other population destabilization efforts going on between countries, between superpowers and other supranational organizations that want their piece of the power pie as well. So if nothing else, our paper 5 years ago was a stark warning of what has happened over that last 5 years and frankly, what's probably going to happen over the next 5, which is why we wanted to get together again and do a little 5-year update.
Yeah, Dr. Hazen, I understand that you're currently working on that update, and the new paper examines how all these issues are affecting global change and how that's changed since the last time you guys got together. What are the new risks you're seeing?
So those new risks that we're seeing are kind of the fleshing out of some of these other things I talked about, really in the geopolitics standpoint, right? We're on the brink of a lot. And I've been saying that for a few years. And although, we might not be kinetic with actual missiles against a lot of the countries that we're sort of fighting against, we're definitely using some other weaponry, especially in the cognitive and those cyber realms, right? I think that we're using very advanced cyber and cognitive weaponry that we haven't had available before, and that helps to keep larger scale conflict almost under the radar from general populations, which is also not necessarily a great thing if the population doesn't really understand how and why things are going on. I think those are some of the biggest threats that we have. And in our last paper, we talked about threats that are purposeful and outside of the supply chain coming in to affect our supply chain operations, but we didn't necessarily go much deeper down that rabbit hole. But over the last 5 years, I guess if there's one thing we could have talked about more in that last paper was these cyber and cognitive threats and what they really mean to commerce and to the people in our societies.
So I know you talk about these cognitive and cyber threats in the paper, but can you just describe a little bit more what's the difference between cognitive versus cyber, and why should supply chain companies care about them?
Sure. And I think if you work anywhere touching a supply chain, you're familiar with cyber attacks, cyber issues. We've had manufacturing facilities across the US and across the globe shut down for weeks at a time based on,
So these are hackers and...
These are hackers coming in and, telling you, hey, we stole all your data, pay us some ransom to get it back, or we're going to go leak this to others. So we've been doing that for a while. I think more of it is in the cyber realm is population destabilization things. And I talk about that on a much higher level, broader, more societal level, where there's people messing with other people in terms of trying to change your opinions, trying to change your loyalties to whether it's your country, your company, things like that. And so you have workers, you have customers who are a little nervous about doing work with you and aren't very trusting. Not to foreshadow too much, but that's one of the main mitigation points of this current paper is just this idea of trust. If you have trust, you can have great supply chains. You can work with great supply chain partners. You can share your data. You can share, and the world's better. Collaborate to graduate. But when you don't have that trust, that fundamental trust, now you're putting in other systems to validate and verify. You're putting in other systems that cost money, cost time, cost talent to try to get that trust. So one example recently of kind of a cognitive and cyber threat was when Israel, the IDF, kind of looks like they somehow infiltrated the supply chain for a terrorist group there. And one day, all their pagers went off in their pocket. So that was there was a supply chain interdiction function there where somebody went out and stole a package, or actually was part of the company that was making those, or somehow, and the world will probably never know exactly what happened there. And then at a command, they were able to just make those pagers blow up. So one, there's a cyber component where a signal had to be sent over a radio wave to get that explosive charge. But then there's also that cognitive threat, like, oh man, these guys are all over us. They have our pagers. And what happened 2 days later was, they keyed their radios and the same things were happening. So there's a huge cognitive battlefield going on, and it's raging. And it's like that with a lot of other private companies, large multinationals. This kind of stuff is happening. It's just this one with Israel was really the first known for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, I mean, historically, we think about this happening with governments, but you're talking about multinational corporations and also small companies that could really have an impact on supply chain.
Oh, definitely. I don't think, and even if you aren't one of these actors in active cognitive cyber warfare, you're somewhere on the battlefield, right? You still need to protect yourself. You still need to go to your supply chain leaders, maybe those bigger companies in your supply chain, and see what they can do to help. Whoever has the most money has the most interest in securing these things.
You're listening to Smart Supply Chain. Let's take a short break here, and we'll talk with Ben some more in just a few minutes. Hey, Sarah, this discussion with Ben really got me thinking about Brexit. That was a pretty big disruption impacting the supply chain.
Yeah, the challenge there were a lot of companies that were servicing all of Europe, either from the EU or all of Europe from the UK. So when Brexit hit, many of them realized that they needed to split their distribution nodes in order to keep their service levels high.
Yes, and as that was happening, there were so many companies that just didn't plan ahead for that disruption. They're all scrambling to get something set up as a reaction to Brexit, and they ended up having a lot of significant challenges getting new 3PLs set up and also just getting their orders out. There was so much confusion about how to get things across the border. So if you didn't already have a plan in place, it took a lot of time to make that happen. Companies that were thinking and acting ahead on mitigations fared much, much better in that whole Brexit situation.
Yeah, at ALOM, we were using the supply chain analysis disruption model, which involved reviewing the risks, but also the specific impacts and the disruptions to be anticipated. We were able to get ahead with our plans and to avoid major pitfalls as a result of Brexit.
Yeah, it was a super useful exercise to go through all of that with our management team. It really worked out well.
Hey, Shireen, do you want to hear my favorite Brexit joke?
Yeah, let's have it.
How will Christmas dinner be different after Brexit?
I don't know. Tell me.
No Brussels.
Wah, 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 Sarah. This is Smart Supply Chain. I'm Shireen Garrison. Let's get back to our interview with Dr. Hazen, who's our supply chain and global trade expert today. Check out all of our podcasts anytime at alom.com.
So let's change the focus to some strategies. In your first paper, you talked about the Sherpa. Can you share that analogy with our listeners?
Oh, yeah. I love the Sherpa analogy, especially in supply chain management. I was just talking about in class today about how a lot of the things that we do under this umbrella of supply chain management, they came from purchasing functions, operations functions, logistics and distribution functions, all of which were never a major part of most organizations' strategic reason for being there and wasn't part of their core competencies or anything else. But after you get big enough, after you span far enough throughout the globe, there's a lot of riches in these niches, as they say. And because of that, there's a lot of detailed oriented things. And if this isn't your bread and butter, if you're not Walmart or Amazon or one of these supply chain leaders, it's probably better to go get advice and have somebody else help you. These niches are more and more complex nowadays, right? You talk about what type of regulation or what types of tags on clothes need to be there if we're going to manufacture in China, but then distribute through Bangladesh and ultimately end up in the United States. You have to have knowledge on the different trade rules going through those countries, different trade rules happening at the country of origin and at the country of delivery. There's just a lot that changes, especially in that environment. that Hannah and I were speaking about in 2019, you have a tariff come up with one country one day, and that just changes your entire distribution network and what you can and can't do, how you have to label things, and so on. Like right now, there's China and India are kind of also going at it a little bit, and that India is not accepting much that's made in China right now. So you have Chinese firms around the world that are making their products, getting them back to some other third country so they can get them into India. Still a Chinese company, but you just have to play a lot more gymnastics here to skirt different rules, regulations, and these borders that folks want, I guess, protect. So you need help, right? Even the best, so the Sherpa analogy, even the best climbers want some help, right? I need somebody there that can guide me in the right direction. I need somebody there that can maybe tell me when hey, this is the time of year this road's out, so let's take this other route. You need somebody there that's the local on the ground that knows the environment and knows that specific problem that you have. And at this point in time, it's just better, easier, and usually a lot cheaper to hire those Sherpas than it is to try to do it all yourself.
To build that expertise in-house, yeah. That makes sense. So that kind of ties into another one of the strategies you covered in the paper, which is really the importance of contracts and how contracts can be strategic as well as partnerships. What's your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, when COVID happened, everybody immediately went through to their contracts and said, what the heck did we have written in here for force majeure? What counts as force majeure? What did they say? These, 1 in 1,000-year things that were going to happen. What did we say we're going to do now? And oh, shoot, maybe this verbiage we've been cutting and pasting for the last 10 years isn't holding up to standards. So the main idea there was really, again, kind of this idea of deglobalization in some way. The risks that are out there to us now were not the same risks that were out there 20, 30 years ago when we were offshore and when we were doing different things. And so we need to take those into consideration and put more weight onto them. And that manifests itself at the business level in these contracts, right, with our business partners, whether that's a customer or a supplier.
Well, and it also ties into that trust conversation as well. Having a solid contract can help you trust.
Yes, trust but verify, right?
That's right.
And hey, at least if you're not going to do it, I know whose fault it is and how to remedy that. That's another thing we saw with contracts over COVID is, hey, there's just our suppliers aren't getting us enough, so we're not able to produce enough. So we got to really rack and stack who we're going to give our product to. And those were some of the hardest conversations that different sales reps and those like them had throughout their entire career. But what that also did was it helped to facilitate some stronger relationships, right? Relationships are built when you have to go through turmoil and tragedy. And if you could make it through COVID with those suppliers and those customers, how much stronger are you after that? So there's some silver lining there.
Yeah, let's talk a little more about suppliers, because one of your mitigation strategies is around your sources of supply. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, you really need to continue to seek alternative sources of supply. You can't count, and we teach this in purchasing class too, right? You can't just count on the one supplier that's always going to be there, always giving you the right thing. Even if it's a great strategic supplier and you've had wonderful relationships for a long time, you still need to go and keep an eye on them, right? You still need to keep an eye on their delivery performance, your supplier scorecards and all those types of things. But you also kind of need to understand where that company fits then financially and geopolitically. One of the things that we saw in the DoD was a lot of the smaller businesses that the Department of Defense was giving small contracts to build some technologies. What would happen was they'd start with the technology build, they maybe get through phase 1, phase 2 of some grants, and then maybe fizzle out, or there wasn't a customer at the end that was apparent. And then what would happen was you'd have foreign capital go and make some significant investments in that company, have a controlling stake in that company. And now these foreign actors of unknown area are in there controlling what could be a significant technology for defense. And so we really had to come up with some better ways to vet from a financial standpoint where this capital is coming from. The government even stood up an office not long ago called the Office of Strategic Capital to do just that, to try to understand where are these capital infusions coming from? Are these the kind of people who are now our threat to us, where maybe 20 years ago we were thinking we were collaborators? So, banks have the know your customer rules, to make sure they're not getting money from terrorists or other, dark deals or organizations, things like that. We need to do more of the same here in our supply chain of know our supplier, right? Who are we actually getting these things from? and who owns them and what are their intents. Because we talked about that Israel example was like a kind of high level example there. There's a lot of folks trying to use supply chain as a weapon to slow down production, both in government organizations and in commercial organizations. So know who you're doing business with and understand them. And that can change quickly too.
Yeah, good point. Well, and tying back to the conversation about who fared well in COVID, having that really strong relationships and partnerships with your supply sources, it really is important. In addition, that cognitive threat that you were talking about is a new threat. So really making sure that you're going back and revisiting that in a continuous basis.
It's not a one and done. And that's what we teach in basic undergraduate procurement or in supply chain courses. I mean, it's a constant monitoring, right? You don't just make that one decision or doing this one company. You got to check them.
Yeah.
And so that pace of checking out who they are and where they're coming, that's going to be dependent on the industry and your company and your comfort with your relationships. But follow up is key. And it's the one thing us humans don't always like to do.
Yeah. And tell us a little more your thoughts about nearshoring or friendshoring, I think is the phrase you used.
Yeah. So, of course, when we talk about finding these different sources of supply, the trend over the last, well, at least 10 years has been let's look for some nearshoring, let's look for some reshoring. This idea, I think, over the last 5 years, especially as geopolitical tensions have risen, this term of friendshoring. So, okay, who are we really aligned with when it comes to our ideals and maybe type of governance structure, the types of supranational organizations that we're part of and whatnot. It's not just about how close you are physically, it's about how close you guys are also ideologically. And so, as Hannah pointed out in one of our conversations for this paper, that ideological threat, wars and conflicts don't start and end maybe on certain times as much as they used to. They just keep lingering, keep having these issues. And a lot of it is ideologically inspired.
Yeah. So one of the most important strategies is this concept of the control tower. What are the opportunities in this space?
A control tower is just having all that data, all that visibility coming to an office or a segment or a group of people that then are prepared to make decisions and act on that new intelligence. Just like a control tower for an airport is, that's where people are in there guiding the airplanes to go around so no one's hitting each other. Control towers are all about visibility. And one of the talking points we had the other day through some email was this idea of we kind of need to have a new thought on visibility. Traditionally, in supply chain, we think visibility, hey, where's my stuff? Where's it coming from? What transportation routes is it on? If this port's shutting down for some reason, I need to know where my things are and if they're going to be affected by that port shutdown so I can reroute immediately. And that's the traditional control tower. But Hannah was discussing even further this idea of we kind of need that, but in more visibility in terms of, again, who we're doing business with, knowing our customer, knowing our supplier, almost as an intelligence gathering addition to the visibility. And so I think your control towers coming further are going to give you more insight into the nature, the DNA of these companies, who owns them, who operates them, who manages them. Are they aligned with our views of what we think right is like as our company? Again, as we're kind of getting more into that ideological conflict.
Yeah, well, all the supply chains are still out there trying to build their control towers, and now you've just raised the bar of what they need to go do. How does AI play a role in this?
Oh boy, how does AI not play a role in that, really? AI is just a really big umbrella for a lot of different types of machine learning, a lot of different types of visualizations, and just this idea of wrangling data together and making actionable insights, whether they're predictive, prescriptive, or whatnot. As we're looking to add visibility, we're going to use more sensors, and human beings, we don't have enough time in the day and enough heads and eyeballs to go through and examine all of that intelligence coming in, all of that information coming off of our sensors. But we still need ways to monitor those sensor data coming in, or else why do we even have the sensors in the first place? So I see AI playing the biggest role in just assimilating and being able to identify faults and other issues going on. That's one of the things that AI has been successfully used for several years now, fault isolation detection. But I think that's going to continue to grow and expand here. But I think we could probably talk about every function and segment of AI and how that's going to be used as well, especially natural language processing, trying to wrangle what we're all trying to say and what we mean by what we're trying to say. These large language models like ChatGPT, how do we integrate that to help our decision making? Because that's what these control towers are doing, right? We're trying to see what's going on out there, find the anomaly, find the artifact that happened, and then we need to make those quick decisions. And really, we're competing against other organizations on how quick and accurate our decisions can be.
Yeah. Do you see any organizations who are helping companies collaborate in this area?
So I do more work, with Department of Defense, and I'm seeing a lot of that happening in just different departments. Every branch of the service now has some AI and cyber center where they're trying to figure out how to leverage AI and how to not just fight with AI, but also how to collaborate across the services and across coalition partners as well. Obviously, ALOM, obviously some of these other large 3PLs that are just able to sit there and really, again, be those Sherpas and understand what are your actual needs, not read an article and now you want to go do things. What are your actual needs? And then how can we help you meet those needs? And I'm seeing a lot of it is very specific to industries and individual companies too. There's no peanut butter spread answer to any of this.
We're excited for the next group of people to be coming into supply chain. They're so much more well armed with information than any of us were when we were first coming out of school. So it's exciting to see all the new things that are happening at university.
Oh, it is. It is. And we have our AI task force. It's up at the president level. And I think most universities, if you're not doing that, you're going to fall behind because it is going to drive change. Exactly what that change is going to be, and if that's going to be good or bad to be determined, but it is going to change things. And we need to figure that out because knowledge management, knowledge development, and dissemination, that is the job of college professors, right? So we need to get on this bandwagon or else we're going to go the way of the dodo.
Can you share any final thoughts with us on how supply chains can be more successful in the years ahead? Just thinking about this whole idea of the global trade environment and all the things that play into that.
I think, and this is some lessons I learned early on in my academic career, reading about the importance of true partnerships. And I think that idea is going to continue to be what makes or breaks companies. If you have the right partners, if you can make the right partners and manage those relationships well, both suppliers, customers, and all the way to the end tier, right? I don't care, we're making glass, let's go see what the sand mines are doing. Not that every partnership has to be buddy, and there's a lot of research on that what type of partnership do you need with different companies, depending on your industry and what you're trying to do with that supplier and so forth. But just at least having a program set up where there is a partnership management function and there is somebody or a group of people that are trying to figure out who are our strategic partners. What does that mean to be those strategic partners? What are we getting out of them? How is this helping to inform our decisions, inform our demand forecasts so that we can understand what we need to do and we can inform our customers? And I think, as we write in the paper here, partnerships drive performance, and that's never going to change. And at the end of the day, no matter what technology we have, we still have to be good friends and partners when we're doing that.
That applies to supply chain and everything in the world, pretty much. If you have visibility and you have trust, you've got all the right things in place to have a good relationship.
That's right. And honestly, I'm glad you mentioned that. The visibility and the trust are what drive those relationships. As Reagan would say, trust but verify.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to your upcoming white paper. It's coming out very soon, and that's going to be outlining the current information that we're discussing here today and probably a little bit more. But we do have one final question for you. Dr. Hazen, what is the best vacation that you've ever taken in your life? Or what is your dream destination that you wish you could do?
So that's a great question. I think give me a lake and some mountains that have slopes so I can ski down them, and I am in absolute heaven. So I love being around the South Lake Tahoe area. I'm from Northern California originally. Beautiful, beautiful places, Kirkwood Ski Resort. I love being over in the Alps. The Jungfrau Mountains are amazing. Just being there, feel like you're on the top of the world. Next, I've never been, but I want to go to Banff and Lake Louise area. Again, beautiful lakes, beautiful mountains. I can pay them some money to drag me up the hill and let me throw my down. So
Excellent. Well, that'll have to be the last word because we're out of time. Thank you, Dr. Ben Hazen, our expert on global trade environments, for being our guest on Smart Supply Chain.
All right. Thank you, Sarah and Shireen.
We're the Garrison sisters, and we hope that you tune in next time to Smart Supply Chain. And don't forget to download the new Global Trade Environment White Paper at alom.com, ALOM.com.